After a breakup, she got drunk and ended up naked in a millionaire's bed, forever changing her life. The music was too loud, the drinks too strong, and the dare hopelessly stupid. But none of that stopped Natalie Brooks from stepping into the elevator of the Aurora Heights Hotel in the heart of Chicago at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, with a drunken smile on her face and a storm inside her chest. "Top floor," her friend slurred, giggling as she pressed the button. 1 hour, no backing out. Just climb into the bed and act like you've got zero self-respect. Natalie wasn't the kind of girl who did things like this. She was cautious, private, a lover of structure, the kind of girl who still used a color-coded planner and wore cat pajamas at 23. But tonight was different. Tonight was a whirlwind of heartbreak and tequila. She had just walked in on her boyfriend of 3 years kissing another woman in their shared apartment. "We're on a break," he'd said. A break? With whom? So when her friends dragged her to a birthday party downtown, she didn't resist. When the shots kept coming, she didn't say no. And when the dare came up, she laughed. Laughed like someone who had decided not to care. For just one night. "Penthouse," she whispered to herself as she stumbled out of the elevator. The hallway was silent, draped in red velvet carpet and lined with soft gold sconces. Her heart pounded, part adrenaline, part alcohol. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. No sound, no light. She slipped inside. The suite looked like something out of another world. Black leather couches, a panoramic city view, champagne chilling in a silver bucket. But Natalie didn't care. Her cheeks burned with shame, but she was already too far in. The dare was simple. Get in the bed. Stay for an hour. Leave before sunrise. The bedroom was darker than she expected. Moonlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows. The bed was massive. The sheets folded down like it had been waiting. She hesitated for a single beat, then pulled off her dress, folded it over a chair, and slipped under the covers. This is insane, she thought, but the bed was warm. The mattress cradled her like a secret. She curled into a ball, closed her eyes, and let out a shaky little laugh. 1 hour, just one stupid hour. She never heard the door open, never knew she wasn't alone anymore. Caleb Voss, tech billionaire, the man business magazines dubbed the Ice King, stepped into his penthouse, expecting nothing but silence. He had just canceled a global meeting, his mind still buzzing with numbers and deals. He did not expect to find a stranger sleeping in the bed he hadn't touched in 5 years. He stopped cold. Most men would have shouted, called security, demanded answers. Caleb only exhaled, loosened his tie, and stared at the girl curled up on his pillow like she belonged there. Without a word, he walked to the other side of the bed, pulled back the covers, and lay down, without touching her. His eyes stared up at the ceiling, blank yet restless. Something about her, about the way she slept, so unaware, so bare, pulled him back to something he thought long buried. And all of that happened before Natalie Brooks opened her eyes. Natalie woke slowly, as if something was pulling her upward from a dream. First came the feeling, warm, soft, unfamiliar. Then the scent, not the cheap detergent of her shared apartment, but something richer, cedar, leather, faintly masculine. She rolled over and froze. There was a man lying next to her. He was facing away, bare-backed, broad shoulders rising and falling with steady breath. His dark hair was tousled. Even from the side, she could see the sharp cut of his jaw. She gasped and bolted upright, clutching the sheet to her chest on instinct. The man turned his head slowly at the sound. Gray eyes, cold, piercing, fully awake, locked onto hers. He didn't look startled. He didn't look angry. He just studied her. "You're not my usual wake-up call," he said, voice low, smooth, like velvet dragged over steel. Natalie opened her mouth, but no words came out. He sat up, stretching lazily. Don't scream. I hate noise before coffee. She blinked. I thought this room was empty. I didn't know. Caleb Voss studied her. Not just the tangled brown hair or flushed cheeks or the oversized sheet she gripped like armor, but the fear in her voice. The kind that didn't come from getting caught, but from feeling lost. "Who dared you?" he asked calmly. Her face flushed deeper. "It was just a stupid game. My friend's birthday. I didn't think—" "Clearly," he said, standing and walking toward a sleek black robe hanging nearby. Every movement carried confidence, control, the kind of grace that didn't ask permission. Natalie looked away, only to glance back when he spoke again. "You can keep the sheet," he said. "But get dressed. I want to talk." "Talk?" she echoed, confused. He turned to face her, fully clothed now, arms crossed. "You broke into my penthouse, slept in my bed, and you're still here. You're lucky I'm not calling the cops." Natalie scrambled for her dress, cheeks flaming. "I'm sorry. I'll leave right now." He didn't move, just watched her struggle to pull the fabric over her head with shaking hands. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused. "Natalie?" He nodded once. "I'm Caleb." She already knew. Who in Chicago didn't know Caleb Voss? Tech billionaire, turned failing startups into empires, no scandals. No one got close, ever, until this morning. As she reached the door, he said one more thing. "Come back tomorrow, 10 a.m. She froze. "What?" "I want to talk," he repeated, "about why a girl who clearly doesn't belong here ended up in my bed." She turned slowly. I didn't mean—" "I know," he said, softer now. "But you did." And Natalie, for reasons she couldn't name, nodded. She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, though fear did curl inside her like a quiet animal. It was something else. The look in his eyes when he asked her to come back. A pull, dangerous and undeniable. The next morning, Natalie sat motionless on the edge of her bed, fingers clenched around her phone as the clock ticked closer to 10 a.m. She hadn't slept. Her thoughts were a storm of confusion. She didn't know why Caleb Voss wanted her to return. She didn't even understand why she was seriously considering doing it. Every rational part of her screamed, "Forget it." But something quieter inside her whispered, "Go, just once more." At 9:42 in the morning, she left the apartment wearing a white t-shirt, worn jeans, and the only clean sneakers she had left. She braided her hair, not for style, but to keep her hands from shaking. Voss Tower stood like a monolith in the center of Chicago, all steel and glass and silent power. In the lobby, everyone moved like they were negotiating world affairs. Natalie felt like an ink blot in a black and white photograph. But when she gave her name, the receptionist simply nodded. "Mr. Voss is expecting you." The elevator took her to the top floor, a level with no public buttons, just a security key. When the doors opened, they led straight into his private office. It looked more like a museum than a workspace. A glass desk, slate gray floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the sky feel almost reachable. Caleb stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets. "You came," he said without turning. "I don't know why," she admitted. He turned slowly, deliberately, like nothing ever needed to be rushed. "Because last night shook you, same way it shook me." Natalie didn't reply. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She sat, fingers twisting in her lap. "I'm not here to interrogate you," he said. "I just want to understand." She took a breath. "It was a dare. My friend's birthday. They thought it would be funny. I didn't know someone lived there. I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't intrude," Caleb said. "You exposed." She looked up. "Exposed what?" He walked toward her, every step measured. "That room has been empty for 5 years. No one has touched that bed since the last night." He stopped, his eyes darkened. "Since she died," he said. Car accident. Hit and run. She was on her way to meet me after a fight. I told her she wasn't enough, that she didn't understand my world. She left angry. She never came back." Natalie's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "I blame myself." Caleb looked at her, raw and unguarded. "That bed became a shrine to silence until you walked in, uninvited, unexpected. But real?" He inhaled. "You didn't just lie in that bed. You cracked something open, something I thought I'd buried." Her voice trembled. "Do you think I'm replacing her?" "No," he said gently. "I think you reminded me that I still can live." They stood there, a breath apart. "I'm not ready to love," he said. "And I'm not asking you to," she answered. He lifted a hand, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "But I need you near, even if I don't know what to call it." She closed her eyes. "Then don't call it anything." He smiled, brief, fleeting. "You're dangerous." "I'm nobody," she whispered. "You're somebody," he replied. "Somebody I didn't know I needed until you walked into the wrong bedroom." Natalie's mornings began to change. She still lived in the cramped apartment with 2 roommates, still worked on architecture projects late into the night, still ate ramen when the money ran out. But each morning she boarded the same train to Voss Tower, not out of obligation or curiosity. But for Caleb, they never touched. No hugs, no kisses, not even a casual brush of hands. And yet, between them was something more present than touch, presence itself. And the longer they stayed in that presence, the more something unspoken began to take shape. No one called it love, but both of them felt it growing, quietly, every single day. Each morning Natalie arrived, Caleb was already there, never late, never surprised. Though neither of them ever made plans, their meetings became an unspoken ritual. He never asked why she came. She never asked why he waited. They shared space without effort. She at the sketch desk with unfinished lines, he at his laptop with spreadsheets and timelines. Sometimes she would doze off at the table, her head resting on her arm, and he would gently slide a pillow beneath it to keep her neck from straining. Once, when she strained her wrist from too much drawing, Caleb didn't say a word. He simply took her hand, turned it gently in his own, and applied a cooling balm. His touch was precise, cold, careful, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. She didn't speak, but her heartbeat skipped, just once, and then it grew, not from grand gestures, but from the smallest things. When Caleb placed her coffee just the way she liked it before she could ask. When Natalie left a handwritten note on his desk, "I hate cold floors. Get a rug." When they both stared out the window one rainy morning and laughed at the same boy in a yellow raincoat stomping through puddles. One day, Natalie asked, "Do you ever feel peaceful?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He just looked at her for a long, quiet moment and said, "Never. Not until you started showing up every morning." She didn't know how to respond, but that day, instead of sketching buildings, she drew him, not the version from finance magazines, but as he sat there, tired eyes, shirt unbuttoned at the top, and a quiet trace of loneliness still lingering. She left the sketch on his desk before leaving. Caleb said nothing. But the next morning it was framed and placed on the bookshelf, like he wanted to hold on to the version of himself that only Natalie had seen. Those moments had no name, but together they formed something undeniable. They were no longer strangers sharing space. They had started stepping into each other, not with words, but with honest presence. Caleb started adjusting his schedule to match her visits. Sometimes they simply sat across from each other. He worked, she sketched. Other times they sipped coffee in silence, listening to the ticking of the clock, as if the outside world no longer applied. One morning she brought him lunch, homemade pasta in a scratched plastic container. He ate it slowly, like it was the first real meal he'd had in months. "You're the first person who's ever fed me without expecting anything in return," he said. She smiled softly. Welcome to normal life. Another time, she fell asleep on the couch in his office, curled up like a small cat. Caleb was in the middle of a call. He watched her for a long time, then ended the call early just to sit in silence, listening to her steady breathing. They never spoke about these moments, because the things that are most real don't always need a name. One evening, Caleb hosted a charity gala for a tech scholarship fund he quietly supported. He hesitated before asking her, "Would you come with me?" Then quickly added, "No pressure, just if you want to." She nodded, borrowing a simple black dress from a friend. No makeup, just a touch of gloss. When she stepped into the hotel lobby where the event was held, Caleb froze. "You clean up different," he said. She rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it." They didn't talk much during the gala. Too many eyes, too many speeches. But every time their eyes met, something passed between them, a silent thread, invisible and undeniable. Near the end, she slipped out to the balcony. Caleb followed. "You're uncomfortable," he said. "I'm not used to pretending," she replied. He stood beside her. "Neither am I." She looked at him. "Then why do you do it?" He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Because pretending is easier than being seen." Her voice barely above a whisper. "I see you." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he reached for her hand. Not to take, not to own, just to hold. It was electric, not in pain, but in truth. Warm, real. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. They didn't say, "I miss you," but Natalie saw it in the way Caleb refilled her coffee before she could ask. He never said, "Are you okay?" but always stood when she frowned at a sketch. They didn't schedule their meetings. And yet somehow every morning they found themselves in the same place at the same time, as if their bodies remembered before their hearts could admit it. Caleb started noticing the smallest things. She didn't like bitter coffee. She wrote in brown ink. She tucked her knees up when focused. Natalie started to see it too. He never let anyone else sit in the chair she always used. No one called it love, but it lived there, in the longer glances, in the silences that weren't awkward, in the kind of calm they only felt in each other's presence. But feelings, no matter how gentle or profound, can't live forever in a place untouched by reality. And they both knew it. There was something fragile threading itself between the quiet mornings and the unnamed glances, the truth that the world outside was still turning, still watching. Natalie and Caleb had been living in a suspended moment where there were no labels, no demands, no fear. But the things we refuse to define are often the easiest to lose. They didn't speak it aloud, but they both felt it. This calm couldn't last. Somewhere out there, the world was watching, and the silence wouldn't protect them forever. Not because they lacked courage, but because sooner or later the world would notice and start asking questions about something they never dared to name. It started with a photo. Natalie didn't know who took it or when, but on an ordinary Monday morning, while waiting for her train, a text from a classmate popped up on her screen. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a link to an article. "Mystery woman seen leaving Caleb Voss's penthouse at dawn." In the photo, Natalie was walking out of Voss Tower, hair tousled, wearing a shirt that wasn't hers. One hand holding her phone, the other clutching her bag. Eyes lowered. Unaware. The article didn't name her, but everything pointed to her. Mystery. Young. Student. The only person ever spotted exiting the top floor, the one everyone knew, was Caleb Voss's private residence. Within 24 hours, the university's online forums lit up with anonymous posts. Twitter threads followed. A gossip blog known for tracking the elite posted, "The Ice King melts, student accidentally ends up in billionaire's bed." Natalie read it all, line by line, as if someone was peeling her skin off under a spotlight. Classmates began to whisper. People stopped saying hello in the library. A professor who used to call on her now glanced past her like she wasn't there. She used to be invisible. Now she was seen, but not as a person, as someone's punchline. Caleb moved fast, as he always did. He had his legal team push takedown notices, reached out to platforms to remove the photo. He even called the university's administration to make sure Natalie wouldn't face disciplinary action. But the internet never forgets. And the world isn't kind to young women caught leaving the wrong man's bed. "I shouldn't have gone there," Natalie said one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Caleb said, eyes fixed on her. "I should have seen this coming." "You can't change how people look at me. But I can shield you from them? I don't need that." She stood. "I've lived 23 years being unseen. I'll survive if they go back to ignoring me." "But I won't," he said, quietly, like it cost him something to admit. Natalie turned away, because she knew if she stayed, he'd do everything in his power to protect her, and the price of that protection would be his image, his reputation, his empire. She couldn't let him lose all that, for a girl the world only knew through one blurred photograph. A few days later, she stopped going to Voss Tower. She turned off her phone, stopped answering messages, not out of anger, but out of fear. Because if she answered, she might go back. And then, one morning, she was gone. No goodbye, no call, just a small piece of paper left on his kitchen counter. "I'm sorry." 3 words, but enough for Caleb to understand. She had left, not out of anger, but because she thought it was what was best for him. He stood there in the quiet, holding a note that felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. It wasn't just her absence, it was the terrifying realization that someone had loved him enough to disappear. But she was wrong, because from that moment on, Caleb Voss, the man who once orchestrated billion-dollar mergers with a single email, lost control of everything. He canceled every meeting, handed all responsibilities to his assistant. No explanations, no resistance. He just left, alone, beginning the search. No power plays, no media teams, just memory, and the fragments of her he had quietly memorized. He retraced her steps to the art supply store where she bought sketch paper, the cafe where she once said she liked butter waffles, the tiny bookstore where she'd read a whole graphic novel and placed it back like she'd never touched it. No one had seen her. Then one evening, returning to his empty apartment, he found a small box left at his door. Inside was the silver necklace he'd once given her, a tiny star as the pendant, and a note. "This was yours before me. It shouldn't remind you of pain." Caleb sat on the floor, clutching the note like it might lead him to her. For the first time in years, he didn't feel rage or control, just emptiness. The next morning, he told his assistant to cancel his schedule, indefinitely. "Are you stepping down?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm choosing something I should have chosen long ago." A week later. On the porch of a small wooden house in rural Michigan, Natalie sat still, flipping through a worn book. Her hair was tied back, her eyes heavy from sleepless nights. She didn't expect Caleb to come, but every night she still checked her phone, as if the habit hadn't caught up to her mind yet. That afternoon, as the light filtered through the trees, a black car pulled into the driveway. She didn't move. Not until the door opened and Caleb stepped out. No suit, no luxury watch, no driver. Just Caleb. Dark circles under his eyes, exhaustion in his posture, but the same gaze, the one that saw her in the dark. "How did you find me?" she asked, barely audible. He stood in front of her, inhaled deeply. "You left your birthday marked on my calendar. If you truly didn't want to be found, you wouldn't have done that." A beat of silence. She laughed softly, tears stinging. "You gave everything up." He shook his head. "Not everything. just the things that never really mattered. She stood. "So, why are you here?" Caleb didn't hesitate. He swallowed hard, eyes locking with hers. "Because I love you, when you were in my bed without knowing who I was. And even more, when you walked away, knowing exactly who I am and still choosing silence instead of scandal." She clenched her hands. "I never thought I'd matter this much." "You were never a dare," he said. "You're the only thing that made me want to begin again." The wind stirred the porch. She let her book fall from her hands, landing on the steps. "So, what now?" Caleb held out his hand. "Now I stop pretending I know how to do this perfectly, and I just show up." She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "Then don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And for the first time, she believed him. There was no dramatic reunion, no tears streaming down, no grand declarations. Just two people standing in front of each other, tired, bruised, but still holding on to the one thing that mattered. The feeling was still there. When Natalie rested her head against his chest, neither of them said a word, but they both felt it, the uneven rhythm of a heart that once believed it had stopped, and now beating again. There was no force, no need for reasons. They didn't need to define what had just happened, only to acknowledge, "I'm still here, and I still want to choose this person." The silence between them wasn't emptiness anymore. It was safety, a shared breath, a stillness strong enough to begin again from where everything once fell apart. And in that quiet moment, free of pretending, free of fear, they knew the real journey was just beginning. 3 months later, the world seemed to have moved on. Headlines faded, whispers dulled. Natalie was no longer the girl leaving the billionaire's penthouse. She was herself again, a quiet architecture student, going to class, working part-time, living simply. And Caleb Voss, the man whose sudden disappearance had shaken boardrooms across the globe, returned. No explanation, no apology. But there was something different in his eyes, calmer, truer. He wasn't the Ice King anymore. He was a man who had stepped back to hold on to what made him feel real. Natalie was by his side, not as a shadow, not as a statement, but as a quiet truth. In meetings, at gallery openings, in the tiny cafe they visited every Sunday morning. She didn't change herself to fit his world. He adjusted his to make room for hers. On the 6-month anniversary of that stupid dare, Caleb took her back to the Aurora Heights Hotel, the place where everything began. They stood before the elevator. "You sure about this?" she asked, half teasing, half nervous. He nodded. "This time, I'm not late." The elevator took them to the top floor. Nothing had changed. The hallway still carpeted in deep red, the lighting warm, the air smelling faintly of wood and expensive quiet. But this time, Natalie entered the room not with heartbreak and alcohol in her veins, but with clarity in her eyes, wholeness in her chest, and her hand in the hand of someone she chose. The room felt like it had waited for them. On the bed, a small note lay on the pillow. "I never believed in accidents. Until you." Natalie picked it up, smiling softly. "When did you write this?" she asked. "The day you first left that room," Caleb replied. "I didn't mean to hold on to it this long." She placed the note back on the pillow. "No ring?" she teased. "Not needed," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not here to promise forever. I just want to stay. Every day if you'll keep choosing me." She paused, then laid her hand over his chest. "I never needed promises," she said. "Just someone who won't leave when things get hard." Caleb took her hand, gentle, firm. "I left once," he said. "I won't do it again." Their embrace this time wasn't goodbye, and it wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning, a steady beat. No fireworks, no roses, Just two people choosing each other, not because they were perfect, but because they were brave enough to try. That night, they didn't go out to dinner. They stayed in the same penthouse that once held a dare and now held a choice. They lay on the bed, looking over Natalie's unfinished sketches. Caleb asked more questions than usual. Natalie laughed more than she thought she still could. Every small moment felt like something words couldn't fully hold. No one spoke of the past. No one planned the future, because for the first time, the present was enough. Before switching off the light, Natalie turned toward him. "I still can't believe one dare started all of this." Caleb pulled her close. "Sometimes, the wrong bed leads you to the right person." She smiled, rested her head against his chest. No more words needed. Just two hearts. A city still buzzing outside. And inside, a love that didn't need a label, but was strong enough to stay through every kind of uncertainty. No miracle happened after that. No extravagant wedding. No screaming headlines. No viral photos lighting up the internet. Just two people, continuing to live. Caleb returned to work, but not the way he used to. He no longer stayed up until 3 a.m., no longer measured his worth by the size of the deal. Now he let himself leave the office early, eat dinner on time, and learn to ask, "Are you tired?" Natalie kept studying, kept drawing, kept juggling architecture projects and overdue rent. But her mornings weren't silent anymore. There was coffee waiting, a good luck before every presentation, and eyes that stayed on her even when she wasn't there. They didn't live together. Natalie kept her old apartment, not out of stubbornness, but because she wanted to love without losing herself. And Caleb understood. He never asked her to move closer than she was ready. Instead, he simply stayed. Every Friday afternoon, he took the train in the opposite direction, toward the old part of town. They cooked together in a tiny kitchen, watched movies on a lopsided couch, argued over how to fold blankets. One day, she asked, "Don't you ever get bored of this?" Caleb only shrugged. "I had everything once," he said. "But I never felt peace until I sat here on this crooked couch next to you, eating instant noodles." And she believed him. Their love didn't explode. It grew quietly in small things. When Natalie doodled his face on napkins, when Caleb bought the exact tea she liked without asking, when they sat in silence, yet still felt full. No one needed control. No one needed forever promises. They only needed to be there, choosing each other, not once, but every single day. Because sometimes the realest love stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin with silence, grow in laughter, and stay. In the quiet promise of choosing each other again tomorrow.